We will never stand next to you. You are the disgrace of this family. My own father looked me dead in the eye and refused to attend my Silver Star ceremony. So, I gave his front row VIP seat to my aunt instead. When the Pentagon surprised her on live television with an incredibly valuable gift. A few hours later, my phone screen lit up with 44 missed calls from my parents. I am Jamila, 35 years old, and for my entire life, I let my family dictate my worth. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives. Growing up in the affluent Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta meant everything was about image. My parents, Desmond and Valerie, built a lucrative corporate consulting firm from the ground up. To the outside world, we were the ultimate representation of Black excellence. We lived in a sprawling modern mansion with pristine landscaping, imported marble floors, and an unwritten rule that our family brand was more important than our actual happiness. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday party, every country club gathering was a carefully curated performance. My younger sister, Jasmine, mastered this performance early on. She was the golden child, perfectly willing to mold herself into whatever acceptable high-status shape my parents desired. I was the opposite. I was rough around the edges, fiercely independent and utterly uninterested in climbing the social ladder. That fundamental difference came to a breaking point on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just returned stateside after a grueling deployment. I stood in the massive echoey kitchen of my parents' house. The air smelled of expensive citrus candles and freshly brewed espresso. I reached into my bag and carefully pulled out 2 heavy gold-embossed invitations. The seal of the Department of Defense pressed into the thick cardstock caught the light from the custom chandelier overhead. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, and slid the invitations across the cool marble island toward my father. Desmond did not even look up. His eyes remained locked on his tablet screen, his fingers scrolling rapidly through stock portfolios and business emails. I waited for a moment, listening to the rhythmic tapping of his finger on the glass screen. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. I cleared my throat and asked him to look at the envelopes. I explained that I was receiving an honor in Washington, D.C., and I wanted him and Mom to be there. I told him it was a major milestone in my career. He finally stopped scrolling. He let out a long, slow sigh that I recognized instantly. It was the sigh he reserved for moments when I was being particularly disappointing. He pushed the invitations back across the marble island with a single finger, treating them like junk mail. His face was a mask of cold irritation. "We will never stand next to you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any parental warmth. "You are the disgrace of this family. You chose to be a grunt instead of going to medical school. Jasmine and Trent are hosting a major charity gala tonight, and we actually have a reputation to maintain." The word grunt hit me like a physical strike. I am a tactical combat paramedic. I have spent the last decade jumping out of helicopters into active firefights to pull wounded men and women out of the dirt. I have held the hands of bleeding soldiers while administering life-saving field surgery under conditions my father could not even fathom. But to Desmond, because I was not wearing a white coat at Emory Hospital, because I did not have a private practice with a lucrative profit margin, my life-saving work was nothing more than blue-collar labor. He saw my military uniform as a failure of his parenting. He saw my combat boots as an embarrassment to his country club aesthetic. Before I could formulate a response, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels echoed down the hallway. My mother, Valerie, glided into the kitchen. She was the picture of Atlanta high society, dressed in a perfectly tailored silk blouse, adjusting a pair of diamond earrings as she walked. She had clearly been listening from the hallway and decided it was time to intervene. She did not ask what the invitations were for. She did not ask about my deployment or if I was okay after being in a combat zone. She simply aligned herself with Desmond as she always did. "Don't be selfish, Jamila," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Your sister married Trent, a man with real pedigree. You running around in combat boots doesn't fit our brand. Take those tickets and go. You are only going to upset your father before the gala." The mention of Trent made my blood boil. Trent was a wealthy white investment banker who had swept Jasmine off her feet a few years ago. My parents practically worshipped him. Trent represented the ultimate social victory for them, a proximity to a different kind of elite wealth and power that they desperately wanted to be associated with. They bent over backward to accommodate his every whim, ignoring his subtle arrogance and the condescending way he often spoke to our extended family. I looked at my mother, feeling the years of suppressed anger rising in my throat. I did not raise my voice. The battlefield had taught me how to control my adrenaline. "You want to talk about pedigree?" I asked quietly. "You want to talk about being selfish? How about the fact that you drained my entire college savings account to pay for Jasmine and Trent's wedding?" The kitchen went dead silent. It was the unspoken elephant in the room, the ultimate betrayal that had fractured my relationship with them permanently. When I was 18 years old, I logged into my college portal to pay my first semester tuition, only to find a zero balance in the account my grandparents had helped establish for me. Desmond and Valerie had quietly liquidated the entire fund. They used my tuition money to pay for Jasmine's $200,000 wedding extravaganza. They used my future to buy imported orchids, a 1-2-piece string quartet, and a custom ice sculpture, all to impress Trent's wealthy family. When I confronted them back then, they told me that Jasmine needed the right start in her social circle and that I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. I did figure it out. I enlisted in the military. I went through grueling basic training, pushing my body to its absolute limits, just to secure the educational benefits I needed to become a paramedic. I earned every single credential, every medical certification, and every rank through my own blood, sweat, and tears. I built a life of honor and purpose entirely without their help. And yet, standing in their immaculate kitchen, I was still just the family embarrassment. Valerie waved her manicured hand dismissively, completely unbothered by my reminder of her theft. "That was years ago. Jamila, stop living in the past. Jasmine needed that wedding for Trent's partners. It was a business investment for the family. Something you would understand if you had actually pursued a real career." She turned toward the refrigerator, effectively dismissing me. "Now, please leave through the garage. The Hendersons are coming over for pergola cocktails in 20 minutes, and I do not want them seeing you dragging that giant military duffel bag down the front steps. Leave through the garage. The ultimate insult. I was not even fit to walk out the front door of the house I grew up in. I looked at the two people who brought me into this world. I saw the absolute emptiness in their eyes, the hollow pursuit of status that had entirely consumed their humanity. I realized in that exact moment that I had spent 35 years trying to squeeze water from a stone. They were never going to be proud of me. They were never going to see my bravery or my sacrifice. They only saw a smudge on their perfect family portrait. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply reached out and picked up the two heavy invitations from the marble counter. I opened them, took out the RSVP list right in front of their faces, and deliberately ripped their names off the card. The thick paper tore with a loud, satisfying sound in the quiet kitchen. "Understood," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I just needed to hear you say it." I turned on my heel and walked out, heading straight for the garage as instructed. I did not slam the door. I did not look back. I walked past Desmond's luxury imported sedan and Valerie's pristine SUV, tossing my duffel bag into the back of my reliable, unassuming Jeep. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and immediately dialed the one person in this world who had actually acted like a parent to me. Aunt Denise answered on the second ring. She was Desmond's older sister, but they could not have been more different. While Desmond chased wealth and status, Aunt Denise had spent her life as a public school teacher, pouring her heart into her community. When my parents stole my college fund, Aunt Denise was the one who helped me pack for basic training. When I was deployed in horrific combat zones, she was the one who sent weekly care packages filled with my favorite snacks and handwritten letters of encouragement. She had been my anchor in the darkest moments of my life. I told her I was coming over and that she needed to find a nice dress. I had a front row VIP seat with her name on it. As I pulled out of the sprawling suburban neighborhood, leaving the gates of my parents' community behind, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen at a red light. It was a text message from Jasmine. "Mom told me you tried to guilt-trip them into your little army banquet. Stop being pathetic. We are busy networking with Trent investors tonight. Stop trying to make everything about you." I read the words twice, letting the sheer entitlement of my sister wash over me. Jasmine had always used words as weapons entirely enabled by our parents' constant protection. She genuinely believed she was superior to me because she had secured a wealthy husband. She thought my career was a joke, a desperate cry for attention. I picked up the phone swipe to clear the notification and lock the screen. I did not text her back. There was no point in arguing with someone committed to misunderstanding me. I smiled grimly, gripping the steering wheel as the highway opened up before me. Let them have their charity gala. Let them drink overpriced champagne and network with investment bankers. They thought my event was just a little banquet in a dusty local hall. They thought I was receiving some generic attendance certificate. They had absolutely no idea that the invitation they just rejected was for a nationally televised gala hosted by the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. They had no idea that their disgraced daughter was about to be awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. And they certainly had no idea that the man I had pulled from burning wreckage during my last deployment was one of the most powerful billionaires in the country, and he was waiting for me on that stage. Aunt Denise's hands trembled slightly as she pressed the brass backing onto my combat medical badge. The tiny metal spikes pierced the dark blue fabric of my uniform jacket, sitting perfectly level above my ribbon rack. She stepped back, smoothing the lapels with palms that had wiped away my tears when I was a child, and packed my bags when my parents drained my college fund. Her apartment indicator was small, filled with the scent of vanilla and old books, but it held more warmth in its few square feet than the sprawling mansion I had just left behind. She looked at my chest, her eyes tracing the ribbons that told the story of a decade spent in the dirt and the blood-pulling broken soldiers from the brink of death. "You look beautiful, Jamila," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You look like a warrior, and your father is a genuine fool for not wanting to stand beside you today." I adjusted my cuffs, staring at my reflection in her hallway mirror. The woman looking back wore her hair pulled into a regulation bun, her posture rigid, her jaw set. I did not look like the society daughter Desmond and Valerie wanted. I did not look like someone who belonged at a country club charity gala, sipping champagne and laughing at hollow jokes. I looked exactly like what I was, a soldier who had survived the worst humanity had to offer. "They are too busy networking with Trent," I said, my tone completely flat. "Mom said my combat boots do not fit the family brand." She practically shoved me out the garage door so the neighbors would not see me. Aunt Denise let out a sharp, bitter laugh, shaking her head as she picked up a lint roller. "The family brand. What a joke. Your parents have spent their entire lives trying to buy their way into a world that will never truly respect them. And they are using that boy Trent as their golden ticket." She ran the roller firmly down my sleeve, brushing away invisible dust. "You know what makes me sick? Trent treats this entire family like we are the help. Remember last Thanksgiving? He sat at the head of your father's table, drank your father's expensive scotch, and actually asked me if public school teachers like myself still had to buy our own chalk because the government was too cheap to supply it. He laughed right in my face. And what did your father do?" Desmond laughed right along with him. "He let that arrogant, smug, white investment banker mock his own sister just to keep the peace." I remembered that dinner perfectly. I remembered Trent looking at me across the turkey, swirling his wine glass, and asking if being an army medic was like playing a video game where you just slap bandages on people. I had spent that previous summer extracting wounded infantrymen from a collapsed building under heavy mortar fire. I had held a young corporal's hand while his heart stopped. But Trent, a man who moved imaginary money around on a computer screen for a living, thought my service was a cute little hobby. My parents had beamed at him, utterly intoxicated by his wealth, completely ignoring the blatant disrespect he directed at their own flesh and blood. "Trent has pedigree," I mocked, mimicking my mother's haughty tone. "That is what Mom told." Aunt Denise grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to turn away from the mirror and looked directly into her eyes. "Listen to me, Jamila. Your parents traded their souls for a zip code and a country club membership. They sold your college fund to pay for a wedding designed to impress strangers. You built yourself from nothing. You saved lives. You earned every single piece of brass on this uniform. Do not you ever let people who worship a bank account tell you what your value is." Her words hit me hard, cutting through the thick layer of armor I had built around my heart. For 35 years, I had craved just a fraction of the validation my parents showered on Jasmine. I had jumped out of helicopters into active war zones, patched up shattered bodies, and earned the respect of the toughest men and women on the planet. Yet, driving over to Aunt Denise's apartment, a small, pathetic part of me had still hurt from my father's rejection. But looking at my aunt now, I realized I did not need Desmond or Valerie's validation. I had the only mother figure who actually mattered standing right in front of me. "Are you ready to go?" I asked, offering her a genuine smile. She smoothed her elegant emerald green dress, a dress I had bought for her specifically for this occasion. "I have been ready since the day you enlisted, baby girl, But you still haven't told me exactly what kind of military banquet this is. You just told me to wear something nice and clear my schedule for the evening. I grabbed my service cap from the table. I wanted it to be a surprise, but let us just say it is a bit more than a standard awards dinner. As the words left my mouth, a low, heavy, rumbling sound vibrated through the floorboards of the apartment. It was a deep mechanical growl that rattled the picture frames on the walls. Aunt Denise frowned, stepping toward the window and pulling back the sheer curtain. "Jamila," she said, her voice suddenly breathless. "What in the world is happening out there?" I walked over and looked over her shoulder. Down on the quiet residential street of Dakar, a massive convoy had just pulled up. Two pristine black armored SUVs with tinted windows were idling directly in front of the apartment building. Flanking them were 4 military police officers on heavy escort motorcycles, their red and blue lights flashing rhythmically, casting bright, sweeping shadows across the neighborhood trees. The sheer size and aggressive posture of the vehicles made the entire street feel like a secure military compound. Neighbors were already stepping out onto their porches, pulling robes tight and pointing at the imposing motorcade. Several people had their phones out recording the spectacle. A man stepped out of the lead SUV. He was wearing a crisp military dress uniform, the silver eagles of a colonel gleaming on his shoulders. He adjusted his cover, marched straight up the concrete walkway, and approached the front door of the apartment building. Aunt Denise stumbled back from the window, pressing a hand to her chest. "Jamila, did you order a taxi or an invasion?" I smiled, feeling a surge of quiet pride. "The Pentagon does not mess around when it comes to their honors, Auntie." A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. I walked over and pulled it open. The colonel stood at attention in the hallway. The moment he saw me, he snapped a perfect razor-sharp salute. I returned the salute instantly. Instantly, my posture locking into military precision. "Staff Sergeant," the colonel said, his voice carrying the deep resonance of command. "The convoy is ready for your transport to Washington. We have a private flight fueled and waiting on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson. The Secretary of Defense is looking forward to meeting you this evening." I heard a loud gasp behind me. I turned to see Aunt Denise gripping the back of her sofa, her eyes wide as saucers, her jaw completely slack. She looked from the colonel to the flashing lights outside the window and then finally to me. "Private flight. The Secretary of Defense." She managed to whisper, her voice trembling with absolute shock. "Jamila, what exactly did you do over there?" I adjusted the cuffs of my uniform jacket and gave her a steady, confident look. "I just did my job, Aunt Denise. Now, grab your purse. We have a flight to catch." The flight from Atlanta to the nation's capital was a surreal blur of hushed luxury and absolute respect. I sat across from Aunt Denise in a plush leather armchair that felt softer than my bed at home. She spent the first 30 minutes staring out the window, completely speechless, clutching her modest, beaded evening bag like someone might snatch it away from her. When she finally found her voice, she simply asked how a tactical medic ends up with a private jet. I smiled and told her that when you pull the right people out of the wrong places, the military brass tends to show their appreciation. When we landed at Andrews Air Force Base, a sleek black town car was waiting for us directly on the tarmac. We bypassed the regular traffic of the city, gliding through the illuminated evening streets until we arrived at the grand facade of the venue, which had been secured entirely for the Department of Defense gala. The exterior was bathed in bright searchlights. Military police officers stood at strict attention along the perimeter. It was a fortress of power and prestige, completely different from the flashy, superficial country club events my parents bankrupted themselves to attend. As we stepped out of the vehicle, a crisp evening breeze hit my face. Aunt Denise linked her arm through mine, her steps, careful but proud. We walked up the wide stone stairs and approached the first security checkpoint. The guards did not just check my identification. When they saw my name and the medals on my chest, they straightened their posture and saluted. For a woman who had spent her entire morning being called a disgrace by her own father, the immediate, unwavering respect of these soldiers felt like a warm embrace. Aunt Denise squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She was seeing firsthand the world I had built for myself, a world where my sacrifices actually meant something. We were greeted by a white, gloved usher holding a gold-trimmed clipboard. He took one look at and immediately bypassed the massive crowd waiting in the general admission line. We were led through the towering wooden doors and into the main ballroom. The sheer scale and opulence of the event took my breath away. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vated ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over hundreds of round tables draped in pristine white linen. The room was a sea of power. 4-star generals in immaculate dress uniforms mingled with global defense contractors in bespoke tuxedos. This was the true elite. This was the room where decisions that shaped the world were made. It was a stark contrast to the hollow image-obsessed circles my parents desperately chased in Atlanta. The usher guided us straight down the center aisle, past rows of influential politicians and military commanders, until we reached the very front row. These seats were reserved exclusively for the night's top honors. 2 chairs sat perfectly positioned right behind the main podium. On the back of one chair was a placard with my name. On the chair right next to it was a placard that read, "Honored guest of Staff Sergeant Jamila." I pulled the chair out for Aunt Denise. She sat down slowly, running her hands over the velvet fabric, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the honor. I sat beside her, adjusting my uniform jacket and taking in the atmosphere. Soft classical music played from a string quartet in the corner. Waitstaff moved silently through the crowd, offering glasses of champagne. For a brief moment, I let myself relax. I felt safe. I felt valued. I felt like I belonged exactly where I was. But peace is a fragile thing, especially when it comes to my family. Just as the room began to fill to its maximum capacity, a sharp, shrill voice cut through the dignified hum of the ballroom. It was a voice I would recognize anywhere, a voice that had spent 35 years demanding attention and throwing tantrums when it did not get its way. I stiffened in my seat, turning my head slightly toward the back of the hall. It was Jasmine. She was standing near the velvet ropes that separated the general standing room section from the seated dining area. She was wearing a flashy, sequined designer gown that was entirely inappropriate for a formal military gala, looking like she was dressed for a reality television reunion rather than a Department of Defense ceremony. Standing right beside her was Trent, sweating profusely in his expensive but poorly fitted tuxedo. I watched them argue with a military police officer at the checkpoint. Jasmine was wildly gesturing with her hands, complaining loudly about how her heels were hurting and demanding to know where their assigned table was. Trent was trying to shush her, pulling at his collar and glancing nervously around the room, desperate to make eye contact with anyone who looked wealthy. The reality of the situation clicked into place instantly. They had not come here for me. They did not even know I was in the building. Trent's boutique investment firm had been bleeding money for months. I knew from mutual acquaintances in Atlanta that he was desperate for a cash injection. He had been trying to pivot his firm into defense contracting, hunting for a government deal that could save his sinking ship. Somehow, Trent had managed to secure a low-level vendor networking pass, a basic entry ticket that allowed him to stand in the back near the bar and hand out business cards to anyone willing to listen. He had brought Jasmine along as eye candy, using her as a prop to help him network his way into a financial lifeline. I watched as the military police officer firmly shook his head, pointing at their badges. He informed them that their lanyards were for the standing room only section, and they were not permitted to cross into the seated dining area. Jasmine crossed her arms, her face twisting into a furious pout. She loudly complained that Trent was a senior investment banker and that it was an insult to make them stand by the service doors. Trent frantically apologized to the guard, pulling Jasmine back by the elbow, terrified of being thrown out before he could secure a single meeting. Aunt Denise followed my gaze, spotting them in the distance. She leaned closer to me, her voice dropping to an incredulous whisper. "Is that your sister? What on earth are they doing standing by the coat check?" I kept my eyes fixed on the spectacle at the back of the room. "Trent is hunting for investors," I replied softly. "Mom told me they were networking tonight. I guess they bought the cheapest ticket in the house just to breathe the same air as the generals." Aunt Denise let out a low, disapproving hum. "All that bragging your mother did about Trent's pedigree, and he cannot even afford a chair at the dinner table. It would be funny if it was not so pathetic." I turned my attention back to the stage, deciding to ignore them. I was not going to let Jasmine's desperate social climbing ruin the most important night of my life. I focused on the podium, waiting for the ceremony to begin, but avoiding my sister has never been a successful strategy. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jasmine push her way through a crowd of standing attendees, trying to get a better view of the VIP section. She was likely scanning the front rows to see which billionaires Trent needed to approach. Her eyes swept across the generals, the politicians, the defense contractors, and then inevitably her gaze landed squarely on the front row. I saw the exact second she registered my face. Her eyes widened in shock, taking in my dress uniform, the medals shining on my chest, and the gold placard on the chair next to me. She looked at Aunt Denise, then back to me, her brain clearly short-circuiting as she tried to comprehend why her disgraced blue-collar sister was sitting in a seat reserved for the most important people in Washington, D.C. The shock on her face lasted only a brief moment before it morphed into pure, unadulterated entitlement. She did not see a decorated soldier being honored. She saw an opportunity. She saw a prime piece of real estate that she believed belonged to her. Jasmine grabbed Trent's arm, digging her manicured nails into his tuxedo sleeve. She pointed directly at me, whispering something frantic in his ear. Trent's eyes locked onto my position, his face lighting up with a sudden greedy desperation. He saw a direct path to the VIP section, a way to bypass the guards and insert himself right next to the defense contractors he needed to exploit. Jasmine pushed past a high-ranking naval officer without apologizing her sequined dress, catching the light as she broke through the crowd. She ducked under the velvet rope when the security guard turned his back. She marched straight down the center aisle, her heels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. Her face was set in a deep, furious scowl, her eyes locked onto me with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. She was coming to claim what she believed was hers. Jasmine stopped dead in front of my chair. The heavy scent of her signature designer perfume immediately clashed with the polished mahogany and polished brass of the VIP section. She stood with her hands planted firmly on her hips, her eyes darting from the gold name placard resting on my chair to the immaculate military dress uniform I was wearing. For a brief second, I saw genuine confusion flash across her face. In her mind, I was the blue-collar disappointment of the family. The idea that I possessed credentials granting me access to a seat she could not buy her way into simply did not compute in her status-obsessed brain. Trent arrived a second later, breathless and sweating, adjusting the collar of a tuxedo that was entirely too tight around his neck. He looked around the front row, his eyes widening as he recognized the faces of global defense contractors and four-star generals sitting just feet away. I could practically see the dollar signs flashing in his eyes. He did not care why I was sitting there. He only cared that I was occupying prime real estate in the exact room where he desperately needed to secure a financial lifeline for his failing investment firm. "What are you doing sitting here?" Jasmine hissed, keeping her voice low, but lacing every word with pure venom. She leaned down her face inches from mine, treating me with the exact same disdain our father had used in the kitchen that morning. "You cannot just sneak into the front row, Jamila. They are going to throw you out and embarrass us." Aunt Denise bristled beside me. She gripped her evening bag with both hands, her knuckles turning white. I felt her shift in her seat, preparing to unleash a lifetime of held-back fury on my sister. I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I did not need Aunt Denise to fight this battle. I had been trained to handle hostile threats with absolute precision. I looked up at my sister, my expression entirely blank. "I am in my assigned seat, Jasmine. I suggest you return to yours before you cause a scene." Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking breath. "Assigned seat, please. You probably bribed a caterer to let you sit here so you could take pictures." She reached out and actually tried to grab the arm of my chair, her acrylic nails scraping against the velvet upholstery. "Get up. Trent actually needs to be up here to talk to the generals. Jamila, move to the back." Trent stepped forward, pasting on the slick, patronizing smile he always used when dealing with my family. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project an air of corporate authority that completely failed to mask his desperation. "Come on, Jamil," he said, his tone dripping with the condescension of a man who believed the world owed him a favor simply because he walked into a room. "Be a team player for once. I have critical meetings to secure tonight. My firm is expanding into government defense contracts, and I need access to the people in this row. You can stand in the back. It is not like anyone is going to notice a medic missing from the front." I stared at the man my parents had drained my college fund for, the man who had mocked my service at Thanksgiving dinner. He honestly believed he could waltz up to the front row of a highly secure Department of Defense gala, demand a seated honor, surrender her place, and face zero consequences. It was the absolute peak of arrogance amplified by my sister's relentless enabling. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I did not even break eye contact with Trent. I simply raised my right hand and lifted 2 fingers into the air. Less than 10 feet away, Two heavily armed military police officers had been watching the entire exchange like hawks. The moment they saw my signal, they stepped forward instantly. Their heavy combat boots echoed sharply against the marble floor, cutting through the soft classical music playing in the background. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized precision of soldiers trained to eliminate threats without hesitation. "Sen, we help you?" "Staff Sergeant," the lead officer asked, his voice booming with absolute authority. He came to a halt right behind Trent, his hand resting casually but purposefully on his utility belt. Trent froze. The slick corporate smile melted off his face instantly. He turned around suddenly, finding himself chest to chest with a towering military guard whose expression was carved from solid stone. I looked directly at Jasmine, letting a slow, icy smile spread across my face. "These two are in the unassigned standing room section," I stated clearly, my voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the nearby military commanders heard every single word. "They have breached the VIP perimeter and are harassing a seated honoree. Escort them back." Jasmine gasped, her face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson as the surrounding defense contractors and high-ranking officers turned their heads to watch the spectacle. "Wait, no," she stammered frantically, waving her hands. "We are family. My husband is an investment banker. We are supposed to be networking." The second military police officer stepped in effortlessly, positioning his massive frame between Jasmine and my chair. "Sir, ma'am, you need to produce your credentials immediately," he ordered. Trent frantically patted down his tuxedo pockets, pulling out a wrinkled, low-level vendor lanyard. He held it up with a shaking hand, attempting to salvage his dignity. "There has been a misunderstanding, officer. I am Trent Sterling. I represent Sterling Investment Holdings. I was just having a word with my sister-in-law before I introduced myself to the secretary." The lead officer glanced at the cheap vendor badge and then looked at Trent with absolute disgust. "That badge restricts you to the rear holding area. Sir, you are in direct violation of event protocol. Turn around and walk toward the back exits right now, or we will remove you from the premises entirely." The humiliation was absolute and instantaneous. The nearby admirals and defense executives were now openly staring, their faces twisted in sheer disdain at the sight of a desperate civilian trying to solicit business in the middle of a military honor ceremony. Trent realized in a split second that his networking strategy was dying a very public, very humiliating death. He had just alienated the exact people he came to impress. His face turned a mottled, furious shade of purple. He grabbed Jasmine's arm with a rough, panicked grip, no longer caring about his polished image. "We are leaving this section," he muttered through gritted teeth, his eyes darting wildly around the room to see who had witnessed his disgrace. "But I am not standing in the back like a commoner," Jasmine hissed, trying to pull her arm away. "Mom and Dad said you were going to introduce us to the contractors." "Move, ma'am," the military police officer barked, stepping forward and physically forcing them to retreat down the aisle. I watched in absolute silence as my golden child sister and her supposed pedigree husband were marched away like trespassers. They stumbled over the velvet ropes, pushed back into the crowded standing room only section near the coat check. Aunt Denise let out a long, shaky breath beside me, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to stifle a deeply satisfied laugh. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire life," she whispered. Before I could respond, the massive crystal chandeliers above us suddenly dimmed. The soft hum of conversation across the ballroom died, instantly replaced by a heavy, reverent silence. A bright, focused spotlight pierced the darkness, sweeping across the stage and illuminating the main podium. The crowd rose to their feet as the United States Secretary of Defense stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted his notes, looking out over the sea of uniforms and evening gowns. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a social gathering to a space of profound, sacred respect. "Tonight, we do not just celebrate strategy or corporate partnerships," the secretary began, his voice echoing powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight, we honor the raw, unflinching courage of the men and women who put their bodies between our freedom and absolute darkness." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "We are here to award the Silver Star to a soldier who represents the absolute best of our armed forces. A tactical combat paramedic who, against impossible odds and under relentless enemy fire, single-handedly saved an entire platoon of wounded men. A soldier who refused to retreat when the evacuation helicopters were grounded and instead breached a heavily fortified enemy compound to extract a high-profile civilian hostage from a war zone. Please join me in welcoming Staff Sergeant Jamila Davis. The applause begins as a low rumble and crescendos into a deafening roar. Aunt Denise squeezes my hand so hard her fingernails bite into my skin, but I do not feel the pain. I feel only the electric charge in the air as I stand up smooth the front of my dress uniform and march toward the stairs of the stage. My combat boots have been replaced by polished dress shoes, but my stride is exactly the same as it is in the field. Purposeful, unshakable. As I reach the center of the stage, I halt and snap a crisp salute to the Secretary of Defense. He returns it with a warm, deeply respectful look in his eyes. The applause fades as a senior military official steps up to the secondary microphone. He opens a leather-bound folder. The room falls so silent you could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. He begins to read the official combat citation. The words echo across the massive ballroom, formal and heavy with history for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action. As the officer details the date and location of the ambush, the extravagant ballroom around me seems to dissolve. I am no longer standing under crystal chandeliers. I am suddenly thrust back into the blistering heat of that sun-baked valley, tasting dust and copper in the back of my throat. The citation describes the moment our convoy was hit by a coordinated ambush. The initial blast flipped our lead transport vehicle instantly, trapping 4 men inside a burning metal cage. The official record states that under heavy enemy machine gun fire, Staff Sergeant Davis refused the order to fall back and wait for armored reinforcements. But the official record does not capture the sound of my squad leader screaming my name over the radio, telling me it was a suicide mission to cross that kill zone. It does not capture the suffocating heat of the flames as I crawled on my stomach through the sand, dragging my medical bag behind me, entirely exposed to the enemy ridgeline. The officer continues reading, detailing how I systematically extracted 3 critically wounded soldiers from the wreckage. He mentions the shrapnel that tore through my left shoulder during the second extraction. He describes how I used my own body as a physical shield to protect a young private whose legs had been crushed, applying dual tourniquets, while the ground around us exploded with mortar fire. While the elite crowd listens in absolute awe, my mind violently snaps back to the marble kitchen in Atlanta just hours earlier. I hear my father's voice dripping with icy contempt. "We will never stand next to you. You chose to be a grunt. You are the disgrace of this family." I stood on that stage, my chest tight with a mixture of overwhelming pride and deep lingering sorrow. My father thought my uniform meant I was uneducated. He thought my career choice was a failure because it did not come with a country club membership or a lucrative stock portfolio. He had absolutely no idea what it meant to hold a dying 19-year-old boy in your arms, pressing your hands into his chest wound, lying to his face, and promising him he was going to make it home to his mother. My parents threw me away to protect their fragile social image while I was across the world bleeding into the sand to protect the lives of absolute strangers. The presenter turns the page of the citation, his voice growing even more resonant. He reaches the second phase of the operation. He explains that after securing the wounded, our communication lines were jammed, and the medical evacuation helicopters were grounded due to relentless rocket-propelled grenade fire. We were pinned down with no air support. And that was when intelligence confirmed a high-profile American civilian was being held hostage in the fortified compound just 50 yards from our position. The citation details how I took command of the remaining able-bodied soldiers. It describes the breach of the compound walls. In my memory, the sequence is a flash of adrenaline and raw survival instinct. I remember kicking in the splintered wooden door of a reinforced bunker. I remember the deafening crack of rifle fire in a confined space. I remember finding the hostage tied to a metal chair in the center of the room, battered and bleeding from days of captivity. I did not care how much money he made or what his social status was. In that moment, he was just another life I was sworn to protect. The officer reads the final lines of the citation, explaining how I strapped my own spare Kevlar vest onto the civilian and physically carried him through the crumbling courtyard under direct enemy fire, delivering him safely to the extraction point just as the armored reinforcements finally broke through the enemy lines. For her extraordinary heroism, boundless courage, and unwavering dedication to her brothers in arms, Staff Sergeant Davis reflects the highest credit upon herself and the United States Armed Forces. The officer closes the leather folder. The silence in the ballroom is absolute and incredibly heavy. The Secretary of Defense steps forward, holding the small velvet box containing the silver star. I step up to meet him. As he carefully pins the medal to my uniform, securing the ribbon above my heart, I finally allow myself to look out at the audience. I expected polite, respectful applause from a crowd of politicians and executives. What I see instead steals the breath from my lungs. The television cameras positioned on large mechanical cranes sweep across the audience, broadcasting the raw emotion of the room to millions of people watching at home. I see men and women who have spent their entire lives commanding armies and managing global defense empires. I see 4-star generals, hardened veterans with chests full of their own combat ribbons, standing completely motionless. Their faces are tight with profound emotion. Several of them are openly wiping tears from their eyes. They understand the weight of the citation. They know exactly what it costs to survive a day like the one the officer just described. I look down at the front row. Aunt Denise has her hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, her chest heaving with absolute pride. I am not a disgrace. I am not a grunt to be hidden in the garage. I am a decorated soldier who survived the fire. And right now, the most powerful people in the country are weeping out of respect for my name. Then, breaking every standard protocol for a military awards ceremony, a man in a sharp, tailored tuxedo steps out from the wings of the stage and approaches the main podium. Before the man in the tailored tuxedo can even reach the center of the stage, the applause shifts. It transforms from a respectful, measured clap into a deafening, floor-shaking roar. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, sitting in the front row right next to Aunt Denise, pushes his chair back and stands up. He is a man who has seen decades of war and carried the weight of the nation on his shoulders, and he is standing at attention for me. Instantly, the rest of the front row follows. The defense billionaires, the senators, the allied commanders. Their movement creates a rapid ripple effect across the massive ballroom. Table by table, row by row, the entire auditorium rises as one. Thousands of the most influential people in the country are on their feet. The sound is overwhelming, vibrating through the soles of my polished dress shoes and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I stand at the center of the stage, my shoulders squared, the cold metal of the silver star resting heavy against my uniform jacket. I keep my chin high and my breathing steady, but inside a tidal wave of absolute vindication washes over me. My father told me I was a disgrace. My mother told me to leave through the garage so I would not embarrass them in front of their wealthy neighbors. They told me my life-saving work was a blue-collar failure because it did not come with a luxury zip code or a country club membership. I wish they could hear the thundering sound in this room right now. High above the stage, massive digital screens broadcast the live feed to the room and to the national television networks. The camera operators are masterfully capturing the sheer scale of the standing ovation. I watch the monitors as the live feed switches from a wide shot of the glittering chandeliers to a sweeping dramatic view of the back of the auditorium, scanning the standing room only section where the low-level vendors and uninvited crashers are forced to wait. And right there, magnified on the giant screens for a fleeting but unmistakable few seconds, I see them, Jasmine and Trent. They are pressed against the brass railing near the exit doors, looking like they have just been struck by lightning. Trent's face is completely drained of color, his skin a sickly pale white against his tight tuxedo collar. The arrogant, slick investment banker, who mocked my military service at the Thanksgiving table, is staring up at the monitors, with his mouth hanging wide open in utter disbelief. Hai is looking at a room full of the exact government contractors and defense titans he has been desperately trying to network with to save his failing firm. And every single one of those billionaires is currently giving a standing ovation to his sister-in-law. Jasmine looks even worse. Her flashy, inappropriate sequin dress catches the harsh light from the exit signs, making her look entirely out of place among the dignified crowd. Her hands are gripping the velvet rope so tightly her knuckles are bone white. The smug golden child superiority that has defined her entire existence is completely visibly shattered. For 35 years, my parents enabled her to believe she was better than me because she married a man with a perceived pedigree and a corporate title. She genuinely believed my life was a pathetic joke, a desperate cry for attention. Just a few hours ago, she texted me to stop being pathetic and to stop making things about myself. Now she is standing by the coat check, watching the most powerful men in the free world weep out of respect for my name. The fake social hierarchy my parents built and worshiped just collapsed right in front of her eyes. She is a nobody standing in the shadows, and the sister she called a grunt is the absolute center of the universe. I do not smile. I do not need to. The look of profound, terrifying realization on Jasmine's face is enough justice for a lifetime of disrespect. The applause continues for nearly 2 full minutes, a relentless wave of gratitude that fills the cavernous space. Finally, the man in the tailored tuxedo who had stepped out from the wings reaches the main podium. He raises his hands, gently motioning for the crowd to take their seats. It takes several moments for the roar to die down. The rustling of thousands of chairs echoing through the hall signals the crowd settling back in their attention, now entirely focused on the stage. Breaking military protocol during a Medal of Valor ceremony is practically unheard of. The military operates on strict, unwavering traditions scheduled down to the exact second. Yet the Secretary of Defense willingly steps aside, yielding the microphone to this civilian without a single word of protest. The man adjusts his jacket. He does not look like a general or a politician. He looks like a man who has survived a waking nightmare. He grips the edges of the wooden podium, his knuckles turning white as he takes a deep, shaky breath. He looks directly at me, his eyes shining under the bright stage lights, and leans into the microphone. "My name is Sterling Price," the man says, his voice thick with a raw, unfiltered emotion that you rarely hear from men of his stature. "I, as the founder and CEO of Vanguard Tactical Systems, a global defense contracting empire worth billions of dollars. He is the man I pulled from the crumbling bunker in the desert." Standing at the podium, he does not look like a titan of industry. He looks like a man who understands exactly how close he came to never seeing his family again. He looks out at the sea of uniforms and evening gowns, his grip tightening on the edges of the wooden lectern. 2 months ago, I was sitting in a windowless concrete room bound to a metal chair, entirely certain that I was going to take my last breath in the dirt, he tells the crowd. The silence in the ballroom deepens. I heard the firefight outside. I heard the explosions. I knew the evacuation helicopters had been grounded. I had made my peace with the end. He pauses, taking a shaky breath, turning his head to look directly at me. And then the door shattered. Sterling continues his voice, ringing with absolute reverence. Through the smoke and the gunfire, Staff Sergeant Davis stepped into that room. She was already bleeding. She was already exhausted, but she did not hesitate. She took off her own Kevlar vest and strapped it onto my chest. She did not ask for my name. She did not care about my net worth, my corporate titles, or my social standing. She just saw a human being who needed to go home, and she decided she was going to be the one to get me there. A collective shiver seems to run through the auditorium. The camera operators on the heavy cranes swing their lenses from Sterling to me, broadcasting this deeply intimate confession to millions of viewers across the nation. I think about the sheer poetic irony of this moment. My parents, Desmond and Valerie, spent my entire life chasing the approval of wealthy executives just like Sterling Price. They drained my college fund to buy a fake high society pedigree because they believed proximity to wealth made them superior. They threw me out of their pristine kitchen this morning because my combat boots did not match their elite country club aesthetic. Yet, here is one of the richest, most powerful men in the country, standing on a nationally televised stage, telling the world that my combat boots are the only reason he is still breathing. Sterling clears his throat, regaining his corporate composure, though his eyes remain fiercely bright. When I returned to the United States, I wanted to give Staff Sergeant Davis everything he explains, his voice, projecting a newfound, commanding energy. I wanted to write a check that would change her life the way she saved mine. I wanted to hand her the keys to my company. I wanted to give her the world. A murmur ripples through the crowd. In the back of the auditorium, where the unassigned standing room guests are clustered, I know exactly what Trent and Jasmine are doing. Trent is a desperate investment banker bleeding money standing 50 yards away from a billionaire who is casually talking about writing life-changing checks. Trent's entire reason for crashing this gala was to beg for a fraction of the attention Sterling Price is currently laying at my feet. But Sterling says raising a finger to quiet the murmurs. I quickly learned that the United States military operates under a strict, unwavering code of ethics. Active duty service members cannot accept massive financial gifts or personal fortunes for doing their duty. The Uniform Code of Military Justice expressly forbids it. Staff Sergeant Davis made it very clear to my legal team that her honor is not for sale and her service is not a transactional commodity. I noted slightly from my seat in the front row. It is true. His lawyers had contacted me weeks ago with astronomical offers, and I had flatly refused every single one. I did not put on this uniform to get rich. However, Sterling continues, a sharp, brilliant smile breaking across his face. I am a businessman who does not easily accept the word no. If military protocol prevented me from rewarding the soldier directly, I instructed my legal team to find a loophole. If I could not reward the woman who saved my life, I decided I would reward the foundation that built her. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifts from solemn respect to electric anticipation. I decided to honor the family that raised a woman of such unparalleled integrity, unmatched courage, and selfless devotion, Sterling declares, his voice booming over the speakers. I can only imagine the absolute hysteria occurring in Atlanta right now. If Desmond and Valerie are watching this broadcast in their luxury living room, they are likely jumping out of their imported leather chairs, screaming at the television screen. They probably think their toxic image, obsessed parenting, is about to be rewarded with a billionaire's blank check. I can almost picture my mother hastily adjusting her jewelry, ready to claim her prize for the daughter she called a disgrace just hours ago. Sterling reaches inside his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulls out a thick, gold-embossed leather portfolio. He holds it up for the cameras to see. I have established a private, fully funded organization called the Valoriskin Foundation. Sterling announces it is a state-of-the-art charity dedicated to providing elite medical care and transition services for wounded combat veterans. But a foundation requires a headquarters, and it requires an executive director with the heart and the discipline to run it. He steps out from behind the podium, walking right up to the edge of the stage, closing the distance between himself and the front row. Inside this portfolio is the deed to a $4 million estate in the heart of Georgia, fully paid for to serve as the permanent headquarters for this charity. Sterling states, his voice ringing with absolute triumph. Attached to it is a $5 million trust fund to ensure the operation runs smoothly, complete with a highly lucrative lifetime executive salary for the director. The crowd gasps. The sheer magnitude of the gift is staggering. It is a fortune. It is instant, unquestionable elite status. It is exactly the kind of wealth, power, and prestige that Trent has been destroying his own firm trying to attain. Sterling stops right in front of my chair. He does not look at the cameras. He does not mention my father. He does not mention my mother. He looks directly past me, his eyes locking onto the woman sitting in the honored guest chair by my side. Because Staff Sergeant Davis made it very clear who stood behind her when things were at their darkest. Sterling says, his smile radiant. Would the woman who packed her bags, who sent the care packages, and who provided the unconditional love that built this hero please come up here? Sterling extends his hand toward the audience. Aunt Denise, he calls out, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Please come to the stage. Aunt Denise sat completely frozen. The grand ballroom, filled with the most powerful military commanders and defense contractors in the world, shifted its collective attention entirely to her. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock, her hands trembling violently in her lap. For 35 years, this woman had quietly supported me from the background. She was a public school teacher who stretched her meager paycheck to send me care packages in active war zones. She never asked for recognition, and she certainly never expected a billionaire to call her name on national television. I reached over and gently took her hands. I stood up and pulled her to her feet. The entire front row of 4-star generals parted ways, making a clear path for her to walk to the stage. She moved slowly, her emerald green dress catching the light. When she reached the stairs, Sterling Price did not just wait behind the podium. He walked down the steps to meet her halfway. He took her trembling hand in both of his and guided her up to the center of the stage, standing her right next to me. The cameras zoomed in, broadcasting her overwhelmed, tear-stained face to millions of viewers across the country. I have read the letters you sent to your niece while she was deployed, Sterling said, his voice echoing through the silent, captivated auditorium. Staff Sergeant Davis kept them in her medical bag. When we were waiting for the extraction helicopters, when we were surrounded and unsure if we would live to see the sunrise, she read your words to me. You told her to be brave. You told her that true strength comes from serving others. You told her that you would always be standing right beside her, no matter what. Aunt Denise covered her mouth, letting out a soft sob. That is what true family looks like, Sterling continued, turning to face the audience and the cameras. It is not about protecting a social brand. It is not about superficial status or country club appearances. True family is the person who packs your bags when you have nothing and reminds you of your worth when the world tries to strip it away. Every single word he spoke was an absolute devastating execution of my parents. Desmond and Valerie had spent their entire lives treating me like a liability because I did not fit their shallow definition of black excellence. They had literally hidden me in their garage this morning. Now the CEO of a global defense empire was dismantling their entire value system on live television. Sterling held up the gold-embossed leather portfolio. He turned back to Aunt Denise and placed it gently into her hands. This portfolio contains the deed to a $4 million estate located in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta. Sterling announced. The crowd let out a collective gasp. I felt a fierce burning thrill shoot through my veins. Buckhead was the exact elite neighborhood where my parents lived. Aunt Denise, the public school teacher they constantly looked down on now, owned an estate that likely dwarfed their own heavily mortgaged mansion. But a house is just a building, Sterling added, his smile. Brilliant. The Valoriskin Foundation needs a leader. Attached to that deed is a $5 million operating trust to establish a transition center for wounded combat medics. And I can think of no one more qualified to serve as the executive director than the woman who raised the greatest medic I have ever known. The position comes with a $250,000 annual salary, effective immediately. Denise, this is yours. You earned every single penny. Aunt Denise broke down completely. She clutched the heavy leather portfolio to her chest, bowing her head as tears streamed down her face. She tried to speak, to offer some word of thanks, but the emotion was simply too overwhelming. I put my arm around her shoulders, holding her steady. The applause that erupted from the crowd was deafening. The generals in the front row were cheering loudly, celebrating a woman who had dedicated her life to quiet, unrewarded service. It was the ultimate vindication, a profound, life-altering reward handed directly to the only person who actually deserved it. As the auditorium thundered with applause, my eyes drifted back to the velvet ropes at the rear of the hall. The camera operators were focused tightly on the stage, but from my vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the standing room section. Trent looked like he was going to vomit. I was gripping the brass railing with both hands, his knuckles stark white, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was a failing investment banker, a man running a fraudulent firm that was bleeding cash by the second. He had crashed this military gala in a desperate, pathetic attempt to hand out business cards to anyone who would look at him. He had mocked Aunt Denise at our Thanksgiving table, laughing in her face and treating her like a peasant. Now Trent had to stand behind a velvet rope like a common trespasser and watch a billionaire casually hand Aunt Denise an empire. He just watched $5 million in liquid trust funds get handed to the very woman he thought was beneath his notice. The sheer, agonizing regret radiating from his pale face was absolutely delicious. He was looking at a financial lifeline that was completely permanently out of his reach. Beside him, Jasmine was unraveling. Her flashy sequin dress seemed to hang off her rigid frame. Her mouth was open in a silent scream of horror. The realization of what had just happened was visibly crushing her. My parents had originally been assigned the VIP seats Aunt Denise and I were currently occupying. The invitations I had placed on their marble kitchen counter had their names on them. If Desmond and Valerie had simply shown up, if they had possessed even a single ounce of genuine parental love instead of toxic vanity, Sterling Price would have called them to the stage. They would have been handed the $4 million estate. They would have secured the exact elite government connections and immense wealth they had spent their entire pathetic lives chasing. They threw away a multi-million-dollar empire because they thought my military ceremony was a joke. They gave up generational wealth to attend a local charity dinner. I watched as Trent suddenly turned on Jasmine. The facade of the perfect wealthy white husband and the flawless golden child sister cracked wide open. I could not hear their words over the roaring applause, but their body language was unmistakable. Trent was gesturing wildly toward the stage, his face twisted in fury, clearly blaming Jasmine and her parents for costing him the greatest networking opportunity of his life. Jasmine was shaking her head, shrinking back against the coat check counter, completely humiliated. The Secretary of Defense returned to the podium, stepping up beside Sterling. He offered his final congratulations to me and Aunt Denise, shaking our hands with a firm, respectful grip. The military band situated in the balcony struck up a triumphant, soaring march. The formal ceremony had reached its conclusion, and Isher stepped forward, gently guiding Aunt Denise and me toward the side stairs of the stage. The bright, blinding spotlights faded behind us as we walked down into the shadows of the wings. Through the headset of a nearby television producer, I heard the sharp command to cut the live broadcast and transition to a commercial break. The moment we stepped off the stage and into the quiet carpeted hallway leading to the VIP green room, the heavy formal atmosphere lifted. Aunt Denise leaned against the wall, sliding down slightly until she was sitting on a padded bench. She placed the gold-embossed portfolio on her lap, staring at it as if it might disappear. "Jamila," she whispered, her voice shaking, "this is not real. Tell me I am dreaming." I knelt down in front of her, placing my hands over hers. "You are not dreaming, Auntie. You are the executive director of the Valoriskin Foundation. You never have to buy your own chalk for a classroom ever again." She let out a wet, joyful laugh, pulling me into a fierce embrace. I closed my eyes, resting my chin on her shoulder. I had survived the dust, the gunfire, and the blood. I had survived the toxic, suffocating weight of my parents' expectations. I had finally won. But the real world rarely lets you rest for long. As I stood up to help Aunt Denise gather her things, a sharp, relentless vibration started in the pocket of my dress uniform. It was a frantic, aggressive buzzing that did not stop. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was lit up, flashing brightly in the dim hallway. I stared at the notifications, feeling a cold, dark amusement settle deep in my chest. The screen of my phone was a waterfall of desperate panic. I stood in the quiet carpeted hallway leading to the VIP green room and simply stared at the glowing rectangle in the palm of my hand. It was vibrating so continuously that it felt hot to the touch. 44 missed calls. I read the number at the top of the screen and let out a short, hollow laugh. The sheer audacity of the people who shared my blood was staggering. I scrolled through the manic notifications, my thumb brushing against the glass. 20 missed calls from Desmond, 15 missed calls from Valerie, 9 missed calls from Jasmine. Less than 6 hours ago, these exact same people had looked me dead in the eye and told me I was the disgrace of the family. They had shoved me out of their pristine kitchen, terrified that their wealthy neighbors might see my military duffel bag. They had told me my combat boots did not fit their brand of black excellence. Now my phone was melting down with their desperate, pathetic attempts to reach me. I tapped the screen and opened my text messages. A barrage of frantic words flooded my vision. Jasmine had sent a string of chaotic, heavily misspelled messages. She was no longer the arrogant golden child telling me to stop being pathetic. "Jamila, answer the phone right now." Her first text read, "Trent is losing his mind. You have to tell that billionaire that Trent is your brother-in-law. We need to speak to him. Jamila, please do not do this to us." Valerie had texted next. The woman who told me to leave through the garage was suddenly playing the role of a doting, affectionate mother. "Sweetheart, we are so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you were destined for greatness. Please call your mother back. We need to discuss the foundation immediately. It is a family matter." But it was the text from my father Desmond that truly captured the absolute shameless delusion of my family. It arrived in all capital letters, radiating a frantic, terrifying greed. "Jamila, there has been a huge misunderstanding. We are your parents. Tell them Denise is just your aunt. Tell Mr. Price that the estate belongs to us. We are your immediate family. Answer the phone right now." I read Desmond's words over and over again. There has been a huge misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was their belief that I would ever let them profit off my blood and my sacrifice. For my entire life, I had craved a single text message from my father telling me he was proud of me. I had jumped out of helicopters, survived ambushes, and saved the lives of bleeding soldiers, hoping that one day Desmond would look at me with the same reverence he reserved for investment bankers and country club presidents. He never did. But the second a billionaire handed out a $4 million deed to a mansion in Buckhead and a $5 million trust fund, suddenly I was his beloved daughter. Suddenly, there was a misunderstanding. My parents were already in Washington, D.C., staying at a luxury hotel downtown, getting dressed for Trent's useless charity gala. They must have seen the live broadcast on the television in their suite. They must have watched in absolute horror as the multi-million-dollar empire they had spent their entire lives chasing was handed directly to the public school teacher they constantly mocked. The panic driving their texts was the realization that they had literally thrown away a fortune because of their own toxic vanity. Aunt Denise noticed me staring at my screen. She had finally managed to catch her breath, though she was still clutching the gold-embossed portfolio to her chest like a protective shield. "Who is calling you so much?" she asked, her voice still trembling slightly from the shock of the ceremony. I turned the screen around so she could see the endless list of missed calls and frantic text messages. Her eyes scanned the notifications, and the lingering tears of joy on her face quickly dried, replaced by a look of profound disgust. "Are they completely out of their minds?" she whispered, shaking her head. "They threw you out of the house this morning. They told you they would never stand next to you. And now they want to steal the blessing that was given to you. They only respect power, Auntie," I said quietly. "And right now they realize we hold all of it. They thought this was a dusty little army banquet. They had no idea they were throwing away an empire." I watched the screen light up again with another incoming call from Valerie. I did not decline it. I did not answer it. I simply pressed the side button, switching the phone to completely silent, and slid it back into the pocket of my dress uniform. I was done giving them my energy. I was done letting their toxic demands dictate my emotions. I had cut the invisible strings they used to control me, and I was never letting them tie me down again. We walked the rest of the way down the hallway and entered the private VIP green room. The space was magnificent, filled with plush velvet seating, catered delicacies, and a quiet, respectful atmosphere. Other military honorees and defense executives were mingling softly, celebrating the night's events away from the flashing cameras. I guided Aunt Denise to a comfortable armchair and handed her a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. She took a slow sip, her eyes drifting down to the leather portfolio in her lap. "I still cannot believe this is real," she murmured, running her thumb over the gold lettering. "A house in Buckhead. A foundation. Jamila, I am just a high school history teacher. I do not know the first thing about running a multi-million-dollar veterans charity. You know everything about taking care of people who have been forgotten," I told her firmly, kneeling down beside her chair. "You took care of me when my own parents abandoned me. You have more integrity in your little finger than the entire board of directors at Desmond's consulting firm." Sterling Price saw that. He knows exactly who he chose to lead this foundation. "You are going to be incredible." Aunt Denise smiled, a warm, genuine expression that lit up her entire face. She reached out and touched the silver star resting on my uniform jacket. "I am so proud of you, baby girl. Not because of the medals or the money. I am proud of the woman you chose to become." Before I could respond to her beautiful words, the heavy mahogany door of the green room opened. A man in a sharp-tailored black suit with a discreet, clear earpiece stepped inside. He had the unmistakable posture of private executive security. His eyes scanned the room quickly, moving past the politicians and commanders before locking entirely onto my dress uniform. He walked over with purposeful, measured steps, keeping his hands clasped politely behind his back, coming to a halt just a few feet away from our chairs. "Staff Sergeant Davis," he said, his voice low and incredibly serious. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have a developing situation at the main reception doors. There are two individuals currently causing a significant disturbance at the Velvet Rope. They are demanding immediate access to the VIP area and aggressively insisting that they are your parents." I thanked the security officer, keeping my voice perfectly steady, and told him I would handle the situation personally. Aunt Denise grabbed my wrist, her eyes wide with fresh panic. She asked if she should come with me to run interference, but I gently placed my hand over hers and shook my head. I told her to stay exactly where she was, to drink her sparkling water, and to enjoy the feeling of being a millionaire. This was a battle I needed to fight completely alone. I stepped out of the quiet sanctuary of the green room and made my way down the long carpeted corridor leading toward the main reception lobby. With every step, I took the heavy brass of the silver star rested against my chest, a physical reminder of what I had survived to get here. I thought about the bullets, the burning sand, and the absolute terror of the battlefield. Compared to that, dealing with Desmond and Valerie was nothing but a minor administrative task. I felt no fear. I felt no anxiety. The invisible chains of obligation in seeking their approval had been completely severed on the stage tonight. I was walking toward them, not as a desperate daughter seeking love, but as a decorated soldier holding all the cards. The VIP reception lobby was a masterpiece of Washington elegance. Soft jazz played from a live band in the corner, and waiters in crisp uniforms carried silver trays of champagne past towering floral arrangements. The atmosphere was designed to be a haven of quiet, dignified power, but cutting sharply through that refined environment was a sound I knew intimately. It was the shrill, demanding pitch of my mother's voice. As I rounded the corner, the scene unfolded before me like a tragic comedy. Desmond and Valerie were putting on a spectacular display of absolute desperation. They had clearly driven like maniacs from their luxury hotel downtown. Desmond's expensive silk tie was crooked, and a sheen of frantic sweat coated his forehead. Valerie, whose hair was usually a flawless, immovable helmet of hairspray, looked thoroughly disheveled from the humidity and the sheer panic of missing out on a fortune. They were pressing their bodies aggressively against the heavy burgundy velvet rope that separated the entry foyer from the exclusive reception area. Flanking the rope were 3 massive military police officers. The guards stood with their feet shoulder-width apart and their hands resting casually on their duty belts. They looked completely and utterly unbothered by the 2 wealthy Atlanta socialites currently throwing a massive temper tantrum in their faces. Valerie was aggressively waving her designer clutch at the lead officer. "You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with," she shrieked entirely, abandoning her carefully crafted high society persona. "I am the mother of the guest of honor. You will unhook this rope right now and let us through. We are personal guests of sterling price." Desmond was standing right beside her, practically vibrating with greed. He was dropping the names of various politicians and corporate executives, demanding that the head of security be fired for keeping them waiting. He looked pathetic. He looked like a man watching a winning lottery ticket blow away in the wind, completely abandoning his dignity to try and catch it. I stopped walking, lingering in the shadows of a massive marble pillar just a few yards away. I simply watched them for a moment. These were the people who obsessed over their public image. These were the people who told me my combat boots were an embarrassment to their brand of black excellence. Yet here they were screaming at military guards in the lobby of a Department of Defense gala, acting like complete fools because they smelled money. Then Desmond turned his head and his eyes locked onto me as I stepped out from behind the pillar into the bright light of the lobby. The transformation was instantaneous and physically repulsive to witness. The red-faced, screaming, aggressive man vanished in a fraction of a millisecond. Desmond suddenly stood up perfectly straight. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive jacket, cleared his throat, and plastered on the most sickeningly sweet artificial smile I had ever seen in my entire life. It was the exact same bright, hollow smile he used when greeting country club presidents and wealthy consulting clients in Atlanta. Jamila's sweetheart Desmond bellowed his voice, carrying over the soft jazz music echoing off the marble walls. He waved his hand frantically, acting like the proudest, most affectionate father in the entire world. "We made it, honey. Tell these guards to let us through right now. There has been a massive, ridiculous mix-up with the guest list." Valerie instantly dropped her hostile posture and mirrored his fake, overwhelming joy. She clutched her hands to her chest, her eyes wide with manufactured maternal warmth. "Darling, you were so absolutely wonderful on that stage. We rushed over here as fast as we possibly could. We are just bursting with pride. Now, be a good girl and tell security to unhook this rope. We need to speak to Mr. Price about the trust fund immediately." I stood frozen, letting her words hang in the air. They did not even try to hide it. There was no apology for throwing me out of the house this morning. There were no genuine tears of relief that I had survived a brutal combat deployment. There was not a single solitary word about the fact that I had almost died pulling a man from a burning building. The very first thing out of my mother's mouth, the absolute top priority in her mind, was a direct demand to speak to the billionaire about the money. They honestly believed they could just rewind time. They thought they could erase 35 years of emotional abuse, pretend the garage incident never happened, and smoothly collect a $5 million prize that belonged to someone else. They thought I was still the same broken, desperate girl who would do anything to win their affection. They thought calling me sweetheart and darling would magically unlock the doors to an empire. I did not rush over to them. I did not smile back. I did not say a single word. I walked slowly and deliberately, letting the heavy tread of my combat boots sink into the plush carpet until I was standing just inches away from the velvet rope. I looked directly into the eyes of the 2 people who had brought me into this world. I saw the desperate naked greed shining brightly in their pupils, stripping away every last ounce of their fake high society dignity. They were completely hollow inside. I stood perfectly still, my shoulders squared in my dress uniform, my face a mask of absolute unbreakable ice. I stared blankly at the people who had thrown me away, watching the fake smiles on their faces begin to falter under the freezing weight of my silence. The lead security officer stepped forward, placing himself slightly between me and the velvet rope. He looked at me with absolute professional respect, ignoring the frantic, sweating man and the wide-eyed woman desperately trying to catch my attention. Staff Sergeant Davis, the officer, said, his deep voice easily cutting through the tension. Do you know these individuals? Are they on your approved guest list for the private reception? I kept my hands clasped loosely behind my back, maintaining my perfect military posture. I looked directly into Desmond's eyes. I saw the absolute terror swimming in his pupils. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He knew that the empire he had spent 35 years trying to fake his way into was slipping right through his fingers. I turned my head slightly to look at the security officer. I kept my voice completely flat, deadpan, and devoid of a single ounce of emotion. I have absolutely no idea who these people are, I stated clearly. My family is already inside. The silence that followed my words was profound. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. Then the explosion happened. Valerie shattered her carefully manicured high society facade into a million pieces. She let out an ear-piercing, unhinged shriek that echoed off the marble walls and completely drowned out the soft jazz playing in the background. Several defense contractors and their wives spilled their champagne, turning around in absolute shock to stare at the woman losing her mind at the entrance. Jamila? How dare you? Valerie screamed, her voice cracking as she slammed her hands against the heavy velvet rope. I am your mother. We are the ones who raised you. We put a roof over your head. You tell these guards to unhook this rope right now. We demand to speak to Sterling Price. You owe us that money. Desmond grabbed the brass stanchion holding the rope, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He was no longer trying to play the proud father. He was a desperate, greedy man watching $5 million evaporate. You listen to me right now? He bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You are going to let us in there. We are your blood. You are nothing without the name we gave you. The security officers immediately moved in their hands, dropping to their batons. Sir, step back from the barricade immediately. The lead officer commanded, his voice ringing with lethal authority. But before the guards could physically restrain my parents, a new wave of chaos erupted from behind them. Trent pushed his way to the front, shoving Valerie aside with a violent, panicked motion. His tuxedo was drenched in sweat, and his slicked-back hair was falling into his eyes. The arrogant, wealthy investment banker who had spent years treating my family like his personal charity case was completely spiraling. He realized in that exact moment that Desmond and Valerie had absolutely zero leverage. He saw that they had alienated the one person who could save his failing firm, and he decided to save his own skin the only way he knew how, by throwing them completely under the bus. Officer, listen to me. Trent pleaded, his voice high and whining. He slapped his hands together in a desperate begging motion. These two people are completely out of line. They are an absolute embarrassment, and I apologize for their behavior. They are insane. But I am Trent Sterling. I am the brother-in-law of the honor. I just need 5 minutes inside. I just need to hand my business card to Mr. Price. Please. My firm is going to go under if I do not get in there. Desmond whipped his head around, staring at Trent in absolute horrified betrayal. You opportunistic snake. Desmond roared, lunging toward Trent before a guard shoved him back. We drained her college fund to pay for your wedding. We funded your lifestyle. You wouldn't even be standing here if it wasn't for our money. Trent laughed a harsh, hysterical sound. Your money? You are a pathetic middle-class consultant trying to play in the big leagues. You are nothing. You have always been nothing. I just tolerated you because I thought you had connections. I stood silently behind the velvet rope, watching the magnificent, beautiful destruction of their fake empire. They were tearing each other apart in the lobby of a Department of Defense gala, screaming about money and status in front of the very elite crowd they worshipped. The polished, flawless black excellence brand my parents had sacrificed my childhood to build was dead on the floor, killed by their own staggering greed and the white son-in-law they had idolized. The head of security had seen enough. He raised his hand, signaling the other officers. Escort these individuals off the premises, he ordered coldly. If they resist, detain them and call the local police. The guards moved with terrifying efficiency. One officer grabbed Desmond by the back of his expensive suit jacket, twisting his arm behind his back and marching him forcefully toward the revolving exit doors. Desmond shouted. Empty th, his expensive leather shoes sliding awkwardly against the polished floor. Another officer took hold of Valerie. She thrashed and cried tears of pure rage, her designer heels kicking out as she was forcefully walked backward. She screamed my name over and over again, demanding I fix this, demanding I give her what she was owed. I did not blink. I just watched her go. Trent was the most pathetic of all. He actually dropped to his knees, clutching the base of the brass stanchion, weeping openly, and begging the guards to just let him slip his business card under the door. 2 guards had to physically lift him off the floor by his armpits, dragging his limp, sobbing body out into the cool Washington, D.C. night. They were tossed out onto the concrete pavement like common vagrants. The heavy glass doors slided shut, cutting off their screams. The lobby fell deathly quiet. The jazz band had stopped playing. The elite guests were staring at the doors in stunned silence, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their mouths. I looked at the lead security officer. He straightened his uniform and offered me a polite, apologetic nod. "I am sorry for the disturbance, Staff Sergeant. The perimeter is secure. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." "Thank you, officer," I replied, my voice calm and completely steady. I turned away from the entrance, feeling an incredible, weightless sense of relief wash over my entire body. The toxic anchors that had dragged me down for 35 years were finally gone. I needed a moment of absolute quiet to let the lingering adrenaline fade from my bloodstream. I gave a polite nod to a nearby general and walked down a side corridor heading toward the women's restroom. The heavy dark wood door of the restroom swung shut behind me, sealing out the ambient noise of the reception lobby. The space was immaculate, lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and soft, flattering lighting. I walked over to the marble sinks, turning on the gold faucet. I let the cold water run over my wrist. Taking a deep, cleansing breath, I reached for a thick paper towel to dry my hands, enjoying the profound, beautiful silence. But the silence was a lie. I heard the sharp, unmistakable click of a deadbolt locking behind me. I turned around slowly, my combat instincts flaring to life. Stepping out from the shadows near the back stalls blocking the only exit to the hallway was Jasmine. She had used the loud, chaotic, deeply embarrassing ejection of her husband and our parents as a smoke OKC screen. While the guards were busy physically dragging Trent and Desmond out the front doors, my sister had managed to slip past the security checkpoint and hide herself in the one place the military police could not follow her. Her flashy, inappropriate sequin dress was rumpled and torn near the hem. Her perfect makeup was smeared under her eyes, ruined by tears of absolute panic. She was breathing heavily like a cornered animal, realizing it had nowhere left to run. She stood between me and the door, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. There were no guards in here to save her. There were no parents to cuddle her. It was just me and the golden child entirely alone. I watched my sister stand between me and the heavy mahogany door. The fierce, aggressive posture she had maintained her entire life suddenly vanished. The arrogant golden child facade completely collapsed. Her shoulders slumped forward and her face contorted into a mask of pure desperation. She let out a loud theatrical sob, dropping her designer clutch onto the marble floor. She lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of my dress uniform with both hands. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark streaks across her cheeks. "Jamila, please," she cried, her voice cracking with a frantic, begging tone I had never heard from her before. "You have to listen to me. You have to help us." I looked down at her hands, gripping my uniform. The same uniform our mother had told me to hide in the garage. I did not raise my voice, but my tone was absolute ice. "Take your hands off my uniform right now," I commanded. Jasmine flinched, pulling her hands back as if she had been burned. She wrapped her arms around her own waist, shivering in her torn sequined dress. "We are losing everything," she sobbed, her chest heaving. "Trent is in trouble. He is in so much trouble. His firm is bleeding money, and the banks are calling in his loans. We are going to lose the house in Atlanta. We are going to lose the cars. You have to talk to Aunt Denise. You have to make her give Trent a cut of that $5 million trust fund. It is the only way to save his business. We are family, Jamila. You cannot let us lose everything." I took a slow step back, putting distance between myself and her manufactured hysteria. I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years making sure I knew I was beneath her. I raised a single eyebrow, keeping my expression entirely clinical. "Save his business from what, Jasmine?" I asked. She stammered her eyes, darting nervously around the immaculate restroom lounge. She tried to piece together corporate buzzwords to make the situation sound like a standard financial hurdle. "It is just a liquidity crisis," she stuttered rapidly. "The market shifted unexpectedly. Trent just needs a temporary cash injection to cover some leveraged assets until the next quarter. It is totally normal in high-yield investment banking. He just needs a bridge loan to stabilize his portfolio." Stop lying, I said, my voice cutting through her pathetic excuses like a scalpel. I already know everything. Jasmine froze the air, seemingly vacuumed out of her lungs. When Sterling Price pulled me into his inner circle, his security team granted me top-secret clearance. Clearance, I explained, watching her eyes widen in terror. They ran deep background checks on every single person attending this gala tonight. And because your husband used a low-level vendor pass to sneak into a Department of Defense event, they ran a comprehensive financial dive on his entire corporate structure. I took a step forward, towering over her. Sterling Investment Holdings is completely broke, I stated, laying out the facts with merciless precision. Trent has absolutely zero liquid assets. He does not come from old money. He comes from massive debt. He has been running a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme for the last 3 years to fund your luxury cars, your designer clothes, and your elite country club lifestyle. He has been stealing from his own clients to pay off his initial investors. Jasmine shook her head violently, pressing her hands against her ears as if she could physically block out the truth. That is a lie, she shrieked. Trent is a genius. He is a senior partner. Trent is a criminal, I corrected her. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been quietly investigating his firm for 6 months. They have frozen his offshore accounts. Federal indictments are coming down by the end of the week. Your perfect pedigree husband is going to federal prison, Jasmine, and they are going to seize every single asset you own. A loud, sharp gasp echoed from the restroom entrance. I looked past my sister. The heavy wooden door was pushed wide open. Standing in the threshold were Desmond and Valerie. They had managed to slip away from the security escort for just a moment, ducking into the corridor to hide. Trent was standing right behind them, his tuxedo drenched in nervous sweat, looking like a trapped animal. They had heard every single word. Valerie stared at Trent, her eyes bulging with absolute horror. The perfectly maintained high society matriarch looked as though the ground had just opened up beneath her feet. Is it true? Valerie breathed, her voice trembling with a terrifying realization. Are you bankrupt? Have you been stealing money? Trent took a step backward into the hallway. The slick, arrogant confidence he had weaponized against our family for years was completely gone. He stuttered, holding his hands up defensively, trying to charm his way out of a trap that had already snapped shut. Valerie, listen to me, Trent stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward the main lobby. It is just a misunderstanding with the regulatory board. I can fix this. I just need capital. If Jamila gets her aunt to wire me the funds, I can pay off the initial investors, and the SEC will drop the inquiry. Desmond pushed past Valerie, his face contorted with a rage so profound it looked murderous. You stole from your clients, Desmond roared, his voice cracking. You are a fraud. We drained our daughter's college fund to pay for your wedding. We introduced you to all our consulting partners. We vouched for you. Trent dropped his hands, realizing the polite facade was useless. He sneered a desperate, ugly look, twisting his features. Do not act like you are the victim here, Desmond Trent spat, his voice rising in panic. You practically begged me to marry your daughter because you were desperate to look rich. You funded my lifestyle because you wanted the social status. You bought your own fake pedigree. You are just as pathetic as I am. Desmond lunged forward. He grabbed Trent by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, slamming the younger man backward against the marble wall of the corridor. A physical altercation broke out right in front of the restroom doors. Valerie screamed, clutching the sides of her head, watching the Black Excellence brand she had worshipped her entire life turn into a violent, disgraceful street brawl. Trent shoved Desmond hard, sending my aging father stumbling backward until he hit the heavy wooden doorframe. Trent looked down the hallway and saw 2 military police officers marching rapidly toward the commotion, their radios crackling with orders to detain the trespassers. Trent also realized that because I knew about the federal investigation, Sterling Price knew. The authorities were likely already being notified by the defense contractor's security team. Trent did not try to help Desmond up. He did not look at Valerie. He did not even look at Jasmine, who was now weeping hysterically on the floor of the restroom. Trent turned and ran. He sprinted down the long corridor, abandoning his wife and his in-laws, bursting through the emergency exit doors at the end of the hall, and disappearing into the Washington night. Desmond slowly pulled himself up from the floor. His expensive suit was torn, his tie was ruined, and he looked completely defeated. He stared at the empty space where his golden son-in-law had just been standing. He looked at Jasmine and wailing on the floor. He looked at Valerie hyperventilating against the wall. His entire empire built on lies and stolen college funds was reduced to ashes. Desmond turned his head and looked at me. I was standing perfectly still in my dress uniform, completely untouched by the chaos. Desmond dropped to his knees on the marble floor. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. The man who had refused to attend my Silver Star ceremony was now kneeling at my combat boots. Jamila, please. Desmond begged, his voice, a pathetic, broken whisper. You have to help us. You have to use Aunt Denise's money to pay off Trent's debts. We can cover this up. We can hire lawyers and keep it out of the news. If the city finds out we married Jasmine off to a fraud, our consulting firm will go bankrupt. Our clients will drop us. We will be completely ruined in Atlanta. We will lose our home. You cannot let us lose everything. Please, Jamila, we are your family. I looked down at the man who had called me a disgrace. I looked at the mother who had told me to leave through the garage. I looked at the sister who had told me to stop being pathetic. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but absolute, liberating indifference. You wanted to protect the family brand. Dad, I said, my voice carrying the quiet, lethal authority of a soldier who had survived the fire. Enjoy the headlines. I stepped around him, walking out of the restroom and down the immaculate hallway. I left them kneeling in the ruins of their own making, stepping forward into a brilliant, unburdened future. Jasmine stood there shivering in her torn dress. She wiped at her eyes, smearing dark makeup across her cheekbones. She tried to pull herself together, desperately, trying to summon the polished, wealthy, socialite persona she had hidden behind for years. She took a ragged breath and tried to use corporate buzzwords, likely repeating the exact same lies Trent had been feeding her behind closed doors. It is just a temporary liquidity issue, she stammered, her voice echoing weakly off the marble walls of the restroom. The market shifted unexpectedly this quarter. Trent just needs a quick cash injection to cover some highly leveraged assets. It is completely normal in high-level investment banking. He just needs a bridge loan to stabilize his portfolio until the next fiscal quarter. You do not understand, high finance Jamila. I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years making sure I knew I was beneath her. I kept my expression entirely clinical, treating her frantic excuses the same way I would treat a hysterical patient on the battlefield. Stop lying to yourself, I said, my voice cutting through her pathetic delusions like a scalpel. I already know everything. Jasmine froze. The air seemed to vacuum right out of her lungs. Her eyes darted around the empty restroom lounge as if searching for a way out. When Sterling Price pulled me into his inner circle, his security team granted me top-secret clearance, I explained, taking a slow step toward her. They run deep, comprehensive background checks on every single person attending a Department of Defense gala. You do not just walk into a room filled with 4-star generals and global defense contractors without your entire life being placed under a microscope. And because your husband used a low-level vendor networking pass to sneak through the service doors, they ran an immediate financial dive on his entire corporate structure to ensure he was not a security threat. I stopped just a few feet away from her, towering over her shrinking frame. Sterling Investment Holdings is completely broke, I stated, laying out the brutal facts with merciless precision. Trent has absolutely zero liquid assets. He does not come from old money. He comes from massive, insurmountable debt. He has been running a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme for the last 3 years to fund your luxury cars, your designer clothes, and your elite country club lifestyle. High has been stealing millions of dollars from his own clients just to pay off his initial investors. Jasmine shook her head violently. She pressed her hands against her ears as if she could physically block out the truth. That is a lie, she shrieked, her voice bouncing shrilly off the mirrors. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me. Trent is a financial genius. I is a senior partner at a prestigious firm. You are just trying to ruin my life because you are a bitter, lonely soldier. Trent is a criminal, I corrected her, my tone completely unwavering. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been quietly investigating his firm for 6 months. They have already frozen his offshore accounts. Federal indictments are coming down by the end of the week. Your perfect pedigree husband is going to federal prison, Jasmine, and the government is going to seize every single asset you own. The house, the cars, the jewelry, everything. You are going to be left with absolutely nothing. A loud, sharp gasp echoed from the restroom entrance. I looked past my sister. The heavy wooden door had been pushed wide open. Standing in the threshold were Desmond and Valerie. They had managed to slip away from their security escort for just a moment, ducking into the corridor to hide from the humiliation of being thrown out of the building. Trent was standing right behind them, his tuxedo drenched in nervous sweat, looking like a trapped animal caught in the headlights. They had heard every single word. Valerie stared at Trent, her eyes bulging with absolute horror. The perfectly maintained high society matriarch looked as though the ground had just opened up beneath her feet. The polished, flawless family brand she had worshipped her entire life was crumbling into dust right in front of her eyes. Desmond looked like he had stopped breathing, his jaw hung slack, his face draining of all color. The pedigree son-in-law he had sacrificed my college fund for the wealthy white investment banker he had idolized and bragged about to his elite friends was a complete and total fraud. I watched the realization hit my parents with the force of a freight train. They had sold their souls, abandoned their oldest daughter, and bankrupted their own future for a man who was about to be federally indicted. They were completely ruined. The silence in the restroom corridor shattered the moment Desmond finally found his voice. He lunged forward, his polished facade completely dissolving as he grabbed Trent by the lapels of his sweat-soaked tuxedo. "You stole from your clients!" Desmond roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. "You absolute fraud. We drained our daughter's college fund for you. We vouched for you to every single partner at our consulting firm. We funded your entire lifestyle." Trent did not cower. The desperate cornered investment banker suddenly snarled violently, shoving my father backward with a force that sent Desmond stumbling against the heavy wooden doorframe. "Do not act like you are the victim here." Trent spat, his voice echoing loudly off the marble tiles. "You begged me to marry your daughter because you were desperate to look rich to your neighbors. You bought your own fake pedigree. You are just a pathetic middle-class consultant trying to play dress-up in a world that will never actually accept you," Valerie screamed. She clutched her chest, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the wealthy white son-in-law she had worshipped completely humiliate her husband. Down the hallway, the heavy rhythmic footsteps of military police officers began to echo. The security team had been alerted to the disturbance. Trent looked at the approaching guards and then he looked at me. He realized that because I possessed the security clearance to know about the federal investigation, the authorities were likely already coordinating with the defense contractor's security team. Panic consumed him entirely. He did not check on Jasmine, who was still wailing on the bathroom floor. He did not spare a single glance for Valerie. He turned on his heels, sprinted down the corridor, burst through the emergency exit doors, and disappeared into the cool Washington night. Desmond slowly pulled himself up from the floor. His expensive suit was torn at the seam, his silk tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked at his crying wife, then at his abandoned golden child sobbing on the tile. Finally, he looked at me. I was standing perfectly still, my dress uniform immaculate, completely untouched by the wreckage of their lives. Desmond dropped to his knees on the cold marble floor. The man who had refused to attend my Silver Star ceremony, the man who had told me I was the disgrace of the family just 12 hours ago, was now kneeling at my combat boots. "Jamila, please," Desmond begged, tears streaming freely down his face. "You have to help us. You have to talk to Aunt Denise. Use her money to pay off Trent's debts. We can cover this up. We can hire lawyers and keep it out of the news. If the city finds out we married Jasmine to a criminal, our firm will go bankrupt. Our clients will drop us. We will lose our home. You cannot let us lose everything. Please, Jamila, we are your family." I looked down at the man begging at my feet. I looked at the mother who had told me to leave her house through the garage. I looked at the sister who had told me to stop being pathetic. I felt absolutely no anger. I felt no sorrow. I felt nothing but a profound, liberating indifference. "You wanted to protect the family brand." "Dad," I said, my voice carrying the quiet, lethal authority of a soldier who had survived the fire. "Enjoy the headlines." I stepped around him, walking out of the corridor and down the immaculate hallway. I left them kneeling in the ruins of their own making, stepping forward into a brilliant, unburdened future. 1 month later, the inevitable storm hit Atlanta. Trent was formally indicted on multiple federal charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. The story was splashed across the front page of every major newspaper and financial broadcast in the country. The Securities and Exchange Commission raided his offices, seizing every single asset tied to his fraudulent firm. The fallout for my parents was absolute and completely merciless. The black excellence brand they had sacrificed my childhood to build was annihilated overnight. Their high society friends immediately cut all ties, terrified of being associated with the scandal. Their elite consulting clients terminated their contracts without a second thought. The country club they loved so much quietly revoked their membership. Jasmine lost everything. The government seized the luxury cars, the designer jewelry, and frozen the bank accounts. She was left entirely penniless and had no choice but to pack her remaining clothes into garbage bags because her designer luggage had been confiscated. She moved back into my parents' mansion, but even that refuge was temporary because Desmond had drained his retirement accounts to pay for her lavish wedding and had blindly invested his remaining capital into Trent's failing firm. The bank eventually served them with a foreclosure notice. They were trapped in a crumbling house, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their pride, with nothing left but each other. I, on the other hand, was stepping into a brand new world. I sat on the sprawling stone terrace of Aunt Denise's beautiful $4 million estate in the heart of Buckhead. The morning air was crisp and fresh. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking over the wide wooden table covered in architectural blueprints. We were finalizing the designs for the Valeris Kin Foundation's new transition center for wounded combat medics. Aunt Denise sat across from me reviewing contractor bids with a brilliant, unburdened smile on her face. She looked vibrant, deeply fulfilled, and finally recognized for the incredible woman she had always been. My phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a text message from Valerie. It was another pathetic groveling plea, begging for a relationship, begging for access to the very life she had told me I was unworthy of having. I did not even read the full message. I pressed the block button, permanently deleting her number from my phone and my life. I looked up from the screen and watched the sun rise over the manicured trees of the estate. The golden light warmed my face, bringing a deep, lasting comfort to my soul. I had survived the battlefields overseas, and I had survived the toxic battlefield of my own family. I smiled, turning my attention back to the blueprints. I was completely at peace, surrounded by true family, and ready to get to work. We will never stand next to you. You are the disgrace of this family. My own father looked me dead in the eye and refused to attend my Silver Star ceremony. So, I gave his front row VIP seat to my aunt instead, when the Pentagon surprised her on live television with an incredibly valuable gift. A few hours later, my phone screen lit up with 44 missed calls from my parents. I am Jamila, 35 years old, and for my entire life, I let my family dictate my worth. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives. Growing up in the affluent Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta meant everything was about image. My parents, Desmond and Valerie, built a lucrative corporate consulting firm from the ground up. To the outside world, we were the ultimate representation of high society success. We lived in a sprawling modern mansion with pristine landscaping, imported marble floors, and an unwritten rule that our family brand was more important than our actual happiness. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday party, every country club gathering was a carefully curated performance. My younger sister Jasmine mastered this performance early on. She was the golden child, perfectly willing to mold herself into whatever acceptable high-status shape my parents desired. I was the opposite. I was rough around the edges, fiercely independent, and utterly uninterested in climbing the social ladder. That fundamental difference came to a breaking point on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just returned stateside after a grueling deployment. I stood in the massive, echoey kitchen of my parents' house. The air smelled of expensive citrus candles and freshly brewed espresso. I reached into my bag and carefully pulled out 2 heavy gold-embossed invitations. The seal of the Department of Defense, pressed into the thick cardstock, caught the light from the custom chandelier overhead. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, and slid the invitations across the cool marble island toward my father. Desmond did not even look up. His eyes remained locked on his tablet screen, his fingers scrolling rapidly through stock portfolios and business emails. I waited for a moment, listening to the rhythmic tapping of his finger on the glass screen. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. I cleared my throat and asked him to look at the envelopes. I explained that I was receiving an honor in Washington, and I wanted him and Mom to be there. I told him it was a major milestone in my career. He finally stopped scrolling. He let out a long, slow sigh that I recognized instantly. It was the sigh he reserved for moments when I was being particularly disappointing. He pushed the invitations back across the marble island with a single finger, treating them like junk mail. His face was a mask of cold irritation. "We will never stand next to you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any parental warmth. "You are the disgrace of this family. You chose to be a grunt instead of going to medical school. Jasmine and Trent are hosting a major charity gala tonight, and we actually have a reputation to maintain." The word grunt hit me like a physical strike. I am a tactical combat paramedic. I have spent the last decade jumping out of helicopters into active firefights to pull wounded men and women out of the dirt. I have held the hands of bleeding soldiers while administering life-saving field surgery under conditions my father could not even fathom. But to Desmond, because I was not wearing a white coat at a private hospital, because I did not have a practice with a lucrative profit margin, my life-saving work was nothing more than blue-collar labor. He saw my military uniform as a failure of his parenting. He saw my combat boots as an embarrassment to his country club aesthetic. Before I could formulate a response, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels echoed down the hallway. My mother, Valerie, glided into the kitchen. She was the picture of Atlanta high society, dressed in a perfectly tailored silk blouse, adjusting a pair of diamond earrings as she walked. She had clearly been listening from the hallway and decided it was time to intervene. She did not ask what the invitations were for. She did not ask about my deployment or if I was okay after being in a combat zone. She simply aligned herself with Desmond as she always did. "Do not be selfish, Jamila," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Your sister married Trent, a man with real pedigree. You running around in combat boots doesn't fit our brand. Take those tickets and go. You are only going to upset your father before the gala." The mention of Trent made my blood boil. Trent was a wealthy white investment banker who had swept Jasmine off her feet a few years ago. My parents practically worshipped him. Trent represented the ultimate social victory for them, a proximity to a different kind of elite wealth and power that they desperately wanted to be associated with. They bent over backward to accommodate his every whim, ignoring his subtle arrogance and the condescending way he often spoke to our extended family. I looked at my mother, feeling the years of suppressed anger rising in my throat. I did not raise my voice. The battlefield had taught me how to control my adrenaline. "You want to talk about pedigree?" I asked quietly. "You want to talk about being selfish? How about the fact that you drained my entire college savings account to pay for Jasmine and Trent's wedding?" The kitchen went dead silent. It was the unspoken elephant in the room, the ultimate betrayal that had fractured my relationship with them permanently. When I was 18 years old, I logged into my college portal to pay my first semester tuition only to find a zero balance in the account my grandparents had helped establish for me. Desmond and Valerie had quietly liquidated the entire fund. They used my tuition money to pay for Jasmine's $200,000 wedding extravaganza. They used my future to buy imported orchids, a 1-2, piece string quartet, and a custom ice sculpture, all to impress Trent's wealthy family. When I confronted them back then, they told me that Jasmine needed the right start in her social circle, and that I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. I did figure it out. I enlisted in the military. I went through grueling basic training, pushing my body to its absolute limits, just to secure the educational benefits I needed to become a paramedic. I earned every single cred, every medical certification, and every rank through my own blood, sweat, and tears. I built a life of honor and purpose entirely without their help. And yet, standing in their immaculate kitchen, I was still just the family embarrassment. Valerie waved her manicured hand dismissively, completely unbothered by my reminder of her theft. "That was years ago, Jamila. Stop living in the past." Jasmine needed that wedding for Trent's partners. It was a business investment for the family. Something you would understand if you had actually pursued a real career. She turned toward the refrigerator, effectively dismissing me. "Now, please leave through the garage. The Hendersons are coming over for pre-gala cocktails in 20 minutes, and I do not want them seeing you dragging that giant military duffel bag down the front steps. Leave through the garage." The ultimate insult. I was not even fit to walk out the front door of the house I grew up in. I looked at the two people who brought me into this world. I saw the absolute emptiness in their eyes, the hollow pursuit of status that had entirely consumed their humanity. I realized in that exact moment that I had spent 35 years trying to squeeze water from a stone. They were never going to be proud of me. They were never going to see my bravery or my sacrifice. They only saw a smudge on their perfect family portrait. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply reached out and picked up the two heavy invitations from the marble counter. I opened them, took out the RSVP list right in front of their faces, and deliberately ripped their names off the card. The thick paper tore with a loud, satisfying sound in the quiet kitchen. "Understood," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I just needed to hear you say it." I turned on my heel and walked out, heading straight for the garage as instructed. I did not slam the door. I did not look back. I walked past Desmond's luxury imported sedan and Valerie's pristine SUV, tossing my duffel bag into the back of my reliable, unassuming Clear's Throat Jeep. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and immediately dialed the one person in this world who had actually acted like a parent to me. Aunt Denise answered on the second ring. She was Desmond's older sister, but they could not have been more different. While Desmond chased wealth and status, Aunt Denise had spent her life as a public school teacher, pouring her heart into her community. When my parents stole my college fund, Aunt Denise was the one who helped me pack for basic training. When I was deployed in horrific combat zones, she was the one who sent weekly care packages filled with my favorite snacks and handwritten letters of encouragement. She had been my anchor in the darkest moments of my life. I told her I was coming over and that she needed to find a nice dress. I had a front row VIP seat with her name on it. As I pulled out of the sprawling suburban neighborhood, leaving the gates of my parents' community behind, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen at a red light. It was a text message from Jasmine. "Mom told me you tried to guilt trip them into your little army banquet. Stop being pathetic. We are busy networking with Trent's investors tonight. Stop trying to make everything about you." I read the words twice, letting the sheer entitlement of my sister wash over me. Jasmine had always used words as weapons entirely enabled by our parents' constant protection. She genuinely believed she was superior to me because she had secured a wealthy husband. She thought my career was a joke, a desperate cry for attention. I picked up the phone, swiped to clear the notification, and locked the screen. I did not text her back. There was no point in arguing with someone committed to misunderstanding me. I smiled grimly, gripping the steering wheel as the highway opened up before me. Let them have their charity gala. Let them drink overpriced champagne and network with investment bankers. They thought my event was just a little banquet in a dusty local hall. They thought I was receiving some generic attendance certificate. They had absolutely no idea that the invitation they just rejected was for a nationally televised gala hosted by the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. They had no idea that their disgraced daughter was about to be awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. And they certainly had no idea that the man I had pulled from burning wreckage during my last deployment was one of the most powerful billionaires in the country, and he was waiting for me on that stage. 1 month later, the storm I promised them finally made landfall in Atlanta. The federal indictment against Trent came down on a bright Tuesday morning, and it was a spectacular, highly publicized takedown. Federal agents raided his boutique investment firm in the financial district, seizing servers, filing cabinets, and every single frozen asset they could get their hands on. Trent was led out of his glass corner office in handcuffs, directly in front of the local news cameras. The slick, wealthy, white investment banker who had mocked my military service at the Thanksgiving dinner table was now the lead story on every evening broadcast and financial news network in the state. The charges were staggering: wire fraud, embezzlement, and operating a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The authorities laid out the brutal facts for the entire world to see. Trent had been systematically stealing from his high-net-worth clients for years just to fund his lavish lifestyle and his fake pedigree. The fallout for my parents was absolute and completely merciless. The flawless social brand they had sacrificed my childhood to build was annihilated overnight. The news hit the Atlanta papers, and the high society elite circles they worshipped turned on them instantly. Desmond and Valerie's corporate consulting firm lost its entire client roster within a week. Wealthy executives and prominent politicians were terrified of being associated with the scandal, and they dropped my parents' firm without a second thought. The exclusive country club they loved so much quietly revoked their membership, citing a violation of their moral conduct clause. The people they had spent 35 years trying to impress now treated them like a contagious disease. Jasmine lost absolutely everything. The federal government seized the luxury cars, the designer jewelry, and the vacation properties. They froze every single bank account tied to Trent's name. My golden child sister, who had told me to stop being pathetic and mocked my combat boots, was left entirely penniless. She had no choice but to pack her few remaining unsized clothes into black garbage bags and move back into our parents' mansion. But even that refuge was a ticking time bomb. Desmond had drained his entire retirement savings to pay for Jasmine's $200,000 wedding extravaganza. He had blindly poured his remaining capital into Trent's failing firm, believing he was securing his place among the financial elite. With his consulting business dead and his retirement gone, there was no money left to pay the massive mortgage on their luxury home. Just 3 weeks after Trent's arrest, the bank sent a representative to tape a bright yellow foreclosure notice directly onto Desmond and Valerie's custom mahogany front doors. They were trapped in a crumbling, empty house, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their pride, with absolutely nothing left but each other. They had thrown me away to protect a fake empire, and now they had to sit in the ruins of their own making. While they were packing their shattered lives into cardboard boxes, I was stepping into a brand new world. I sat on the sprawling stone terrace of Aunt Denise's beautiful $4 million estate, right in the heart of Buckhead. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of pine trees and newly cut grass. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking over the wide wooden table covered in architectural blueprints. We were finalizing the designs for the Valoriskin Foundation's new transition center for wounded combat medics. The facility was going to provide state-of-the-art physical therapy, mental health counseling, and career transition services for soldiers returning from active duty. Aunt Denise sat across from me, holding a ceramic coffee mug and reviewing contractor bids with a brilliant, unburdened smile on her face. She looked vibrant, deeply fulfilled, and finally recognized for the incredible woman she had always been. She was no longer just a struggling public school teacher putting up with my parents' elitist insults. She was the executive director of a major philanthropic organization, commanding a room full of architects and medical professionals with absolute grace. Sterling Price had stayed true to every single word he spoke on that stage. The $5 million operating trust had been transferred seamlessly. His legal team had helped us establish the foundation structure, ensuring that every dollar went directly towards supporting the men and women who had put their lives on the line for this country. For the first time in my life, my unique skills and my military experience were not viewed as a family disgrace. They were the exact foundation upon which we were building an incredible legacy of healing. My phone buzzed against the wooden table, vibrating across the architectural blueprints. The screen lit up with a text message. It was from Valerie. Even after everything that had happened, after the complete destruction of their public image and the total loss of their wealth, she was still trying to claw her way back into my life. I glanced down at the glowing screen. The preview of the message showed a pathetic, groveling plea. It read, "Jamila, please, we need to talk to you. We have lost the house and Jasmine has nowhere to go. You have to ask Denise to help us. We are your family and we are so sorry for everything. Please just answer the phone." I stared at the words for a long moment. A year ago, or even a few months ago, a message like that might have triggered a spike of guilt or a desperate hope that my mother was finally ready to be a real parent. I might have picked up the phone trying to salvage a relationship that was fundamentally broken. But sitting on that beautiful terrace, feeling the warm Georgia sun on my face, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger. There was no sadness. There was just a profound, quiet realization that I owed them nothing. Their emergency was not my responsibility. They had made their choices over and over again, and now they were simply experiencing the consequences. I did not open the message to read the rest of her excuses. I did not type out a long, angry reply explaining exactly why they deserve their current misery. I did not owe them my energy or my words. I simply tapped the screen, hit the block button, and permanently deleted her contact information from my phone. I did the exact same thing for Desmond and Jasmine, wiping their digital presence from my life with a few quick swipes. I set the phone face down on the table and looked up. The sun was rising higher over the manicured trees of the